Take a second to think about the best-run law firms in the country. They consistently handle more cases in less time while spending fewer hours toiling over tasks like billing and client intake. My case was designed to help even the busiest law firms achieve peak efficiency. Through automation of routine administrative duties, templatized workflows, and centralized calendars, my case makes short work of your day-to-day processes and keeps your staff on task. Visit mycase.com to learn more and start a free trial. That's mycase.com.
I think it's important for organizations to have candor around, displacement and automation anxiety. It's important to have that dialogue so that people feel informed and equipped to take on the changes that they're being asked to take on, because most people need a lot of help envisioning a future that doesn't exist yet. And unless you're able to give that to them, of course they're going to cling to what they know, because I truly believe that is a human impulse.
Today on LawNext, innovating big law. In January, the world's largest law firm, Baker McKenzie, hired two leading thinkers on legal innovation, Jay and Casey Flaherty, to help the firm, quote, enhance and reimagine the delivery of legal services to global clients. Jay and Casey join us today to discuss their new roles. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment, but first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview. So, Jay and Casey, welcome to LawNext.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Just to recap the news, in January, Baker McKenzie announced that it had hired the two of you, Jay as Director of Pricing Strategy, Casey as Director of Legal Project Management. You're joining a team led by David Cambria, who last year left Fortune 50 company Archer Daniels Midland to become the firm's Global Director of Legal Operations. I wonder if I could just start, because not all of our listeners are going to know everything about you, and although you're both pretty well-known figures in the legal world. But Jay, before we start talking about what you're doing now, could you fill us in on what you were doing before?
Sure. So I think probably it makes sense to start with my run at Seyfarth Shaw, where I had a wide variety of roles. I was there almost 6 years. I spent time in what I would generally call like 3 separate tours of duty, 3 different areas of focus. Initially, I was embedded with a fairly high-end complex discrimination litigation practice, doing many of the things that we would now call legal operations, but also including things like client care and account management for some of the largest clients in that practice, hands-on case management for class actions, and a lot around legal business. So obviously billing and collections and mechanics, but also, giving an eye to whether those invoices reflected the value delivered to the client. So I would call that kind of my first tour of duty. And then after that, I went into a firm-wide role where I had the very clear title of Director of Special Projects, reporting directly to then Chairman Steve Hoare. And a lot of that work was around client service delivery innovation and, kind of rethinking the delivery of legal services and the way we thought about legal business from the client's perspective. So in concrete terms, a lot of my work had to do with partner education, programming internally and externally to drive thought leadership and dialogue around client value. And then I had my last tour of duty as the Director of Strategic Planning, where I focused a lot on communications and, around governance issues for the partnership, our financial performance and strategic direction going forward, although I retained some of my special projects from my second run. And in that role, my last role, I also had the opportunity to build out a research and intelligence function under the strategy umbrella. And then so that was a lot of horizon scanning, which, some of that I had done in the special projects role, but that definitely gave me a broad view of the market landscape, not just in big law, but also the new entrants that were, coming into the space, the emergence or reemergence of the big four as competitors in this space, as well as the proliferation. I think remarkable uptick in activity in legal technology, startups, investments. So kind of scanning those broad trends and figuring out what that might mean for our business. So I think that led pretty naturally into the company I started when I left Cyfarth, 6 Parsecs. It was a research and insights company.
Which I'll confess I had to look up what a parsec was. I did not know that.
Yeah,
let alone 6 of them.
Yes, it's a fun story. It's got a Star Wars backstory, which if anybody has read any of my writing, I actually make Star Wars references quite frequently. But yeah, 6 Parsecs focuses on market research and insights specifically for the legal vertical. I think that's a gap I saw in the marketplace from my role at Cyfarth, where there's a lot of great content about trends in the legal industry, legal business. But a lot of it is very fragmented, and even though there are more and probably higher quality communication channels now than there were 10, 20 years ago, much thanks to tireless work by you and others like you, Bob. A lot of kind of bloggers covering trends that are coming too fast and furious to be covered by the legal press. But from a reader's perspective, it tends to be a fragmented experience, which mirrors how I see the current state of the legal market, which is extremely balkanized. So I wanted to try a different way of talking about the legal market, longer form, more in-depth analysis in specific areas about broad trends, actually. So that is what I spent most of 2018 doing, a lot of legwork, face-to-face conversations, saw lots of demos actually from legal startups, lots of fascinating dialogue with folks in innovation roles across big law, and there are more and more of them now. And in that process, I came upon this amazing opportunity at Baker McKenzie, and it was really, as the Godfather himself would say, David Cambria made me and Casey an offer we could not really refuse. The opportunity to, influence pricing strategy and how legal buy actually happens, how legal work is packaged and sold for one of the biggest firms in the world with the installed client base of Baker McKenzie was just too attractive of a learning opportunity for me to turn down. So that's basically where I think the primary arc is. But I will say that, before I finished college, I was a legal secretary. I was a office manager for Solo. I was a paralegal in a litigation practice. And then, so I've seen legal work in many different business settings from many different vantage points. And I think, in one way or another, I think all of those experiences have conspired to give me, I think what I hope will be an interesting point of view on where legal buy is headed.
And I should say that the Godfather, we're not talking about Marlon Brando here, but we're talking about David Cambria, who has somehow picked up this moniker as the Godfather of legal operations. I'm not even sure who originally gave him that, but everybody seems to refer to him that way. Casey Flaherty, what's your background? What brought you to this point?
Well, I'm the kind of person who can tell you it was Brad Blickstein who gave it to him, and he gave it to him because it's David's favorite movie, and that I guess that's how I should be introduced as a person who knows people. I've been around a while now, at least relative to Jay, and not really any time at all relative to you, Bob.
Yes, I am old. Rub it in, Casey. That's good.
No, not old. Just you've been legal famous longer than either of us have been in legal. Period. I was a litigator out of law school at a large law firm. I moved from a large law firm in-house When I was in-house, I gained some notoriety for my somewhat unique approach to outside counsel management. There were lots of behaviors I'd seen uh, while embedded in a large law firm that I didn't want to pay for as a client. Almost none of them related to legal expertise or how hard people worked. It was all around systems. How do we leverage expertise through process and technology? And Oddly, I gained a reputation as a scold, at least initially, which was that was the opposite of what I was doing. I thought that the biggest mistake that buyers made was to scream at their law firms that they were inefficient in vague terms and then demand a discount because that didn't change behavior at all. I so I commenced a program of structured dialogue with my firms where we would have concrete conversations around specific process improvements. Uh, and it was about deeper, uh, more collaborative relationships. Uh, but I have a somewhat provocative writing style and am willing to say bombastic things that are, of course, true. Like lawyers are terrible at using Microsoft Word, and this is a problem that can and should be fixed. And so that bombast got attention and established a particular kind of reputation, uh, one that I must admit I embraced. Uh, I went, so I gained that notoriety in-house, and I parlayed that very limited fame into consulting career. I consulted primarily with large law departments, but also with law firms around legal service delivery, so process reengineering, but a lot of it focused on the relationship between law firms and law departments. I spent a good chunk of my consulting time operating at the mesh point between law departments and law firms, and that's because I genuinely believe that uh, uh, it's not just that law firms are salvageable. I think that's even too harsh a judgment. I think law firms deliver great value, and that value can be enhanced, and it can be enhanced with appropriate alignment with the client, and that requires change on both sides. We need to change the buy side as well as the sell side, um, and that both sides are on this journey together. And when I was given the opportunity, number one, to work with David and Jay, and number two, at at a platform like Baker, to actually to actually realize much of what I'd been talking about and working on, but mostly on the client side, I jumped at it. Uh, I'll stop there because I would make a great Bond villain. I can monologue for forever.
Well, one of the best things I read about the two of you getting hired at Baker McKenzie was the post by my friend Steve Embry wrote at his blog, Legal Tech Crossroads, which he recalled Winston Churchill's response to the question, "Sir, are you ready to meet your maker?" "Yes," Churchill responded, "but is he ready to meet the likes of me?" And Steve kind of analogized that to your situation and asked, "Is Baker McKenzie ready for the likes of you two?" I mean, as you've said, Casey, you had some bombast, and Jay, you've never been shy about expressing your opinion. What do you say to Steve Embry's question? Is Baker McKenzie? You guys may be ready for Baker McKenzie, but is it ready for you?
Well, Jay, do you want me to start or do you want to go?
Yeah, why don't you start and I'll finish?
Uh, so the answer is more ready than any other firm. So no one anywhere is truly ready for change because if they were completely ready for change, the change would have already happened. Uh, uh, but I much of what I've done over the last 5 years has been go on site at law firms on behalf of clients. And Baker was already making really important strategic investments and moves that have a material impact on the way legal services are delivered and the way they align with clients, and that existed before we were there. One of my favorite shows is Silicon Valley. There's a great line about salespeople and how the best salespeople only sell that which is easy to sell. That's how I felt going into Baker McKenzie. So I'll speak for myself and as director of legal project management. There was already a robust legal project management team in place and integrated into Baker's client teams, client facing work. Uh, this wasn't some aspirational goal. Now, certainly, we want to grow the team. We want to raise the profile of the team. We want to move the team up the value chain. I mean, nothing is ever perfect, but it wasn't as if I'm coming into a situation where I have to convince the firm that legal project management is a good idea. They've already made really uh, deep investments in it, and there was already a plan in place to continue to grow the function. Uh, and and to me, that is consistent with much of what the firm is doing elsewhere. David preceded us. The fact that they made that hire is huge. The services function uh, uh, that 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 David is a lead of is uh, robust. The kind of investments the firm has already made in alternative legal services in places like Belfast and now Tampa. A lot of the structural changes that the COO Jason Marty has spearheaded. Uh, when you dig deep, and there's only so much I can say without getting smacked down by Jay about speaking out of school. But when you dig deep, and we did, uh, I they are the most ready of any firm uh, I've encountered. And in fact, to the extent you've seen this kind of movement from other firms, it tends to be challenger brands. It tends to be firms that need a way to differentiate themselves. Baker McKenzie's already brand differentiated. They're already uh, uh, the number one global brand among law firms, and their revenue numbers are substantial. And the fact that a firm like that was willing to make these kinds of investments, because we're here on this podcast. Uh, this was a very public move. The way hiring David was a very public move. Uh, you don't do that unless you're actually committed, because if all of a sudden we were to be gone in 3 months, people would notice that just as much as they noticed the fact that we joined. And so I've been so impressed by the firm from the initial conversation through today in their willingness to be bold and to change, and the investments that they'd already made long before we got there.
Jay, does that resonate with you? How would you respond to Steve Embry's comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Casey Flaherty and I, definitely have lots of things in common, and I think a lot of that shows in our writing. But I probably
And
tend
you've written in common together too. I mean, you've
yes.
bylined articles together a few times, right?
Yes, and I think what makes that interplay interesting is that we probably see the world maybe 95% the same, and the remainder keeps things interesting. So I think I agree with, almost everything Casey has said, but I bring a slightly different perspective. Casey likes to say that he's coming back into a law firm, and I just like to remind him that the last time he was inside, he was an associate. And things look very different from the business side, as I'm sure he'd agree now. I think my writing definitely has been direct and in some cases provocative, but I also think one of the reasons that a lot of my perspective has resonated, especially with those kind of battle-weary veterans of the legal innovation game, is that some of the things I say are, truisms, like hard things are hard. It's bears mentioning that what we're trying to do is difficult because it is new to almost everybody involved. And by what we're trying to do, I mean change the status quo, right? We've been talking about it as an industry for many years. Some of these issues have been around for more than a decade, maybe 2 decades. And I think it's important that organizations have patience and resilience and a willingness to look and think about the future on a longer timeline than this fiscal year. I mean, I think that is something that resonated most with me as I went through the many conversations that I did at Baker McKenzie before making the decision to join. And, I think probably the message in my writing that has traveled the furthest and resonated the most with kind of battle-weary veterans is that, I think blame-based narratives don't help. I think there is a tendency for us to major in on messages like because lawyers are risk averse, because lawyers are change resistant, or because law firms and incumbents are complacent, they're making too much money, so they don't see critical reason to change. I think some of those observations are probably rooted in some truth and some level of experience. But I also think that there's a need to be more optimistic and constructive about the future in the sense that we need to be action oriented and, maybe stop and ask why those behaviors tend to persist. And a lot of it has to do with incentives and systems and kind of interconnected, factors that drive this very complex business of selling legal services. And buying legal services in the grand scheme of things is still a complex undertaking, right? One of the things I tend to say a lot is we're not selling like widgets. We're not selling, as much as we like to talk about the productization of legal services, there are many, many areas where clients still have undefined, ill-defined, or ill-understood needs, at least at the outset of an engagement. And so there has to be a extensive and sustained dialogue between buyer and seller. And to drive that kind of collaborative dynamic over a period of time that's required to make significant changes, what is required is a spirit of collaboration and positivity that we can find win-win solutions to problems that may seem intractable. And, I think it's that spirit of optimism and, empathy, certainly rooted in commercial pragmatism. I think those are the factors that really, attracted me to Baker McKenzie. And in terms of what, Steve Embry wrote, I think Casey's right. I really felt that they are the most ready of all law firms. But, I would think of it this way. There's, probably 2 dimensions that are very important in driving change, measurable change toward very ambitious, audacious goals. One of them is the will, and the second is the skill, right? I think certainly the firm has displayed willingness to invest, and I think, they are investing in different skills to drive that change. But I also want to point out that, absolutely, position matters. Market position, competitive position is not destiny, but I think that Baker McKenzie sits at a very interesting, position in the marketplace that is different from many of its competitors. It is not only the largest firm in the world, but I would say one of the most global, and that gives the firm a very, very broad kind of point of view about where legal business is headed against the backdrop of where business period is headed for many of our clients. And I think it's that kind of sophistication and, really an appreciation for geopolitical shifts in the world that we live in. I think there is great recognition of what digital transformation is doing. Both in the consumer market and for business in general, because as life becomes more digitized, individual expectations of just work experience, buying experience, service experiences are elevating very quickly, and that changes the pace and demands placed on every single type of business. And then so serving multinational global clientele, I think we are definitely expected to think and plan for the future. And I think that is what the firm is doing. And so I would, to end this long, and I would apparently make a great Bond villain as well, because I've been for a while, but just kind of to stick that landing, I would say we, all three of us, David, Casey, and myself, I think we are looking at this challenge on a much longer timeline. We know that there is a lot of work to be done, but I think, one of the things that unites the three of us and our respective worldviews is that, sure, none of us are afraid to speak our minds, but none of us are afraid to work. And I think we embrace the challenge, and we're very excited for the opportunities to drive lasting, meaningful change on a very large platform.
We're going to stop there and take a short break to hear words from our sponsors, and we will be right back. Welcome back to LawNext. We are speaking with Jay Ohm and Casey Flaherty, who recently joined the firm Baker McKenzie, as Jay as Director of Pricing Strategy and Casey as Director of Project Management. Casey, Jay just alluded to Baker McKenzie's clientele. It's global clientele, and you, of course, were formerly in the client seat. In terms of the work that you're going to be doing now for Baker McKenzie, what do you see as the role of the client in all of this? Does the client become part of what you'll be doing there? And if so, how do you incorporate that perspective?
Absolutely. So client value is the North Star, and clients in many ways define value, but they actually have to define it. Clients have traditionally had a hard time actually articulating value, and so a great way to get them to articulate it is to actually have real conversations with them. And I see that as part of my role with respect to client alignment. Is we have a lot of stakeholders on the buy side. The rise of the legal operations movement, which David is the godfather of, has really changed the buy side dynamics, but it has not completely altered them. It's not as if we went from one buyer, the in-house counsel, to another buyer, the legal operations professional. Instead, now we have a constellation of individuals with different interests and different priorities on the buy side. And so client alignment is more complex these days. We have to take into account multiple views, and in many ways serve them all appropriately. And part of that is helping to create alignment within the client itself around value. And like so many other things, it starts with conversations. Yes, there's data and reporting and dashboards and all kinds of other ways to enhance the decision-making process. But unless we start with conversations around shared values and a shared view of value to the client, we're going to have a very hard time satisfying anyone. And we're going to have a hard time knowing exactly what we should be doing to satisfy the client. So my role will in part be about spending time with clients to align the firm's legal service delivery to their objectives. The other part, of course, is delivering, because it can't just be all talk. I think these days are behind us in many respects, but it used to be that there was plenty of talking between clients and their outside counsel on the golf course, and there is value to that having personal rapport. But I'm much more focused on structured dialogue around concrete service delivery issues and measurable improvements in the way that legal service is delivered, and also measurable improvements in client satisfaction. And one of the best things that clients can do for their firms is give them not just quantitative feedback, but qualitative feedback, and then a forum to discuss that feedback to understand where it comes from, what's driving it, and how it might be changed. And so being involved in that dialogue will be an important part of my role at the firm. But it also won't be solely my role. Again, there are multiple touch points. There are multiple stakeholders. Uh, this is about creating broad-based connections with our clients.
You allude to ALSPs, alternative legal service providers. How do those inform what you want to do at Baker McKenzie? In other words, does a firm such as Baker McKenzie need to be taking a hard look at the ALSP model and making decisions about whether the firm needs to sort of become more agile, become more like an ALSP in the way it delivers services?
Well, I wouldn't say more like an ALSP. I want to move this over to Jay because she's done a lot of work in that space and has amazing insights. But I will say that a huge attraction to me of Baker was the investments they'd already made in alternative legal services in service centers like Belfast and Manila, and what they're doing in Tampa, and that the firm understands that there are different kinds of work that need to be delivered different kinds of ways, how work can be segmented, how you can right source. That doesn't mean the firm operates like an ALSP, but that the firm takes a very nuanced view of legal service delivery. And with that, I want to turn it over to Jay because she's great on this subject.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. So, this touches upon a couple of different things that I think really sets Baker McKenzie apart. I think tying back to some of the remarks Casey just made about building rapport with clients versus structured dialogue, I tend to think, yes, there is a need to build trust between colleagues doing sensitive work across organizational boundaries. And then there's need for structured dialogue to, design and agree upon the mechanics and the operations of how that work is managed. But I think one of the things that will define the next era of legal innovation on the incumbent side is the recognition that systems and infrastructure, processes, and, at scale investments are necessary to deliver on those promises at scale. I am a huge proponent of in-depth dialogue between firm and client, but the work of innovation does not end with talking. No matter how valuable or candid or well-intentioned the conversation is, it must lead to action. I think one of the things that I saw a little differently about the marketplace as compared to Casey and David, because I grew up on the law firm side, especially in a firm that thought very intensely and intentionally about the evolving needs of clients, is that firms are serving lots of different clients all at once. The level of customization that is required to deliver value, which really is situational and contextual to the commercial context that is unique to each client, adds a ton of complexity to law firm operations. And, I would probably point out here that in the decade following the Great Recession, a lot of firms have actually tightened expenses considerably. Some of that has led to maybe underinvestment in infrastructure and a lot of cutbacks that have left a lot of firms, I think, in what Rob Ciccone recently called in an article, management debt, technical debt, process debt. And so I think that, where more investment is needed, a lot of firms find themselves in a position where they're struggling to just deliver on core requirements. And then, so I think that the interest in ALSPs is a little bit different from the need to be agile. I think the way that ALSPs are structured certainly gives them some advantages in terms of, being clearer about costing. In many managed services arrangements, resources are fully loaded on one or two projects. That creates a lot of streamlining that gets rid of the drag that is harder to manage in a big complex firm that is full of very high value fee earners who are able to tackle a lot of different projects and are staffed on many clients at once. So, it's not so much that Baker McKenzie is trying to turn into an ALSP. I think it is thinking more critically about, what are the components that make managed services better in some instances. And I think a lot of that has to do with a nuanced understanding, of course, of different tranches of work and how to best resource different types of legal work. But I think it also has to do with process rigor. I think it also has to do with a recognition that tech-enabled legal services will be an imperative in the future. And I think that thinking in a more segmented way about work sorting and doing that thinking from the client's perspective, what are the streams of work that are most critical to each of our high value client segments? What is the resolution at which value is created in the provision of services for each type of work, and how can we best manage and deliver results that will organically drive the value storytelling that not only we need to do for our clients in the legal function and increasingly in the legal operations function, but in turn, what is the value storytelling that those folks in the legal function and in legal operations roles need to do for their internal stakeholders? I think there is a complexity inherent to B2B services that, we haven't really discussed enough in the legal innovation dialogue. One of the things that David Cambria likes to say that makes me laugh every time is, he'll say very self-deprecatingly that legal operations is a non-core function of a non-core function. And that's not to diminish the value that these folks bring or the importance of that role. It's a reminder that there is context around them. There is a whole ecosystem around them, and they answer to people just like we do inside a law firm. And then so making sure that we are turning those kind of legacy lawyer to lawyer relationships that used to happen over the golf course, over dinner. Those are person to person relationships. And, even though legal services will largely remain a relationship business, it's critical thinking about how do we move that forward to a business to business relationship that, as Casey says, is very broad based with a lot of touch points. How do we navigate that complexity to make clear what value is being requested by the client and how well are their outside providers across an evolving supply chain? How are they delivering? How are they working within each organization and across that supply chain to deliver the best possible value to not just the legal department, but really the end user of services, which is the shared client of everybody in the supply chain. So I think it's that type of thinking that informs Baker McKenzie's investment in ALSP or ALS. And I think that is definitely a factor that was attractive to both of us, as well as to David Cambria.
Well, as much as everybody talks about sort of the three prongs of people, process, and technology, I have to think that at a firm such as Baker McKenzie, which has, something like north of 5,000 lawyers, I believe, that the people part of that remains perhaps the greatest obstacle to modernizing the firm. I mean, there's still got to be an awful lot of people at that firm who are kind of entrenched in the traditional ways of practicing law and thinking about how you price law and deliver legal services in all of that. I mean, do either of you have any thoughts on how you overcome those obstacles within the firm, or how you overcome those sort of old-fashioned, for lack of a better word, ways of thinking about delivering legal services?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start here. I think this is an issue that, I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And, I would actually start by reframing the question a little bit, Bob, because, yeah, absolutely, we are a people-led business. I think even ALSPs would tell you that in legal services, if you're providing legal services of any kind, it is a people business. And then so I think it's really important to shift our thinking as change agents to not think of our stakeholders as blockers. And I think that I really advocate for thinking deeply about, well, why is it that people cling to their old ways of working or what they know? And I think it's important to have the recognition that it's a human impulse and it's very natural. IDEO, which is pioneer in the field of design thinking across products, and now they apply design thinking across sectors. They have a saying, it's, I think, one of their informing principles is that technology moves very fast. Human needs change slowly. I think having that patience and accepting that challenge is really important so that we as change agents don't get frustrated and exhausted. And this is one of the reasons I say it's important for organizations to build resilience. It's important to take a longer view. Beyond that, I would say, the way that I look at people, process, and technology is that, technology is really a booster. I think of it as an enabler, and some technology advances can certainly be game changers in the sense that they make new things possible that were never possible before. And then so it's important to be open-minded to new ways of doing things that are enabled literally by technology. But process is really the glue that kind of threads everything together. McKinsey actually has a great phrase called expert choreography. When you apply process rigor to endeavors that still require a high degree of human expertise, it's best to kind of think of the challenge as choreography, because it is important for people to know their routes. It's important for people to know their roles. It's important for people to understand how what they're doing fits into a larger whole. And I think that's why communication continues to be a huge challenge for complex service providers, not just in legal, but you see it in consulting, you see it in other professional services like the field of medicine, which I think is a great analog for the type of innovation that we need in legal services. In terms of practical matters, right? How do we actually get people to embrace new ways of working, of thinking about their roles, their jobs? One of the things I think is really important is incentives. I mean, it's almost galactically obvious to point out that incentives drive behavior, but I think it's not just the way that incentives are designed, it's the way that they are communicated as well. And just as important as incentives is enablement. Training where necessary, education where necessary. And the training can kind of run the gamut from something very tactical, like, making sure that everybody can use the core technology that is part and parcel of their jobs, to, helping them understand not only the immediate impacts on their day-to-day, but second and third order impacts of frontier and emerging technologies. I think it's important for organizations to have candor around, displacement and automation anxiety. It's important to have that dialogue so that people feel informed and equipped to take on the changes that they're being asked to take on, because most people need a lot of help envisioning a future that doesn't exist yet. And unless you're able to give that to them, of course they're going to cling to what they know, because that I truly believe that is a human impulse.
Right. I know you both have to go in just a couple of minutes, and Casey, I wanted to give you an opportunity to get in a word on that topic before we wrap up. But you have anything to add to what Jay was just saying?
No, I actually will just revert back to what Jay said in the beginning, that hard things are hard, and change is hard, and especially change at scale. And yet, at the same time, there's something about scale that causes that forces different organizational structures to take hold. You simply can't govern 4,000 lawyers like you can 400 lawyers, like 40 lawyers. And while there are absolutely challenges at the scale of the firm, there's also centripetal forces at play that help the centralizing of process and technology to augment the people. And we are people led, and we should be. I mean, our intellectual capital is our greatest asset, and I wouldn't. You can have the best process and technology in the world if they're not leveraging the expertise. Customers aren't going to come to you. Clients aren't going to come to you, and so I don't want to diminish that at all. But again, there were already things in flight in terms of the way the firm was making strategic investments that suggested to me that they are able to change. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, and it certainly doesn't mean that it's going to be overnight. But we had the question, are they ready? And I would still answer more ready than just about anybody else. And that's to their credit, not to ours, because we wouldn't have joined if they hadn't already made those kinds of investments and made a lot of the hard decisions. But now and forever, we need to put in the work. And I must say, I thought I worked hard, and then I started working with Jay and David, and I'm feeling pretty lazy. Well, I'm labeling myself pretty lazy, but I'm also feeling extremely motivated. They are, I mean, both are so smart, but that's not why they're successful. They're successful because I've never seen two people work harder, and because they work so hard, they seem to fit in perfectly at Baker McKenzie.
Well, many will be watching what the three of you and the rest of your team do at Baker McKenzie. I really appreciate both of you taking the time today to talk to us and spend some time with us. Thanks a lot to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, really.
And thanks to the sponsors who keep this show running. As always, thanks to Ben Ambrogi for producing and editing the show. That's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.